Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. Hey, look, quick announcement. First, this episode kicks off the masterclass series I'm super excited about. With that said, I want to be very transparent with you. This collaboration with the guest is a sponsorship. So what exactly does that mean? Well, our guest has just launched a really cool and interesting course in which the discussions that we're having throughout the series are topics that the course covers. Now, with that said, one thing I want to call out to is, look, this is not a pitch for the course. We call out to the course very briefly in the beginning, and then we call out to the course at the end of each of these episodes, but otherwise, we just do deep dives on these subjects that the course does cover. And to the extent where, honestly, we've never covered something like this to this degree on the show before, and to the best of my knowledge, anywhere else. So again, this is not a pitch. And because of the sponsorship, if you do decide to purchase the course through our link, IGM, Indie Game Movement, will get an affiliate commission. So that's what the sponsorship arrangement means. And I just want to be very transparent with you that, look, these are not episodes just a straight out pitch. The course, they really go into great depth, more so than we ever have before, on these topics that I think you're going to find a lot of value. So there's no obligation. I know that there's still a lot of value here. That was always a focus, is to provide you, the listeners, with as much value as possible. And there can be even more if you think the course would be beneficial to you. And again, if you make that purchase, we get a commission. And on top of that, as a bonus, you also get an exclusive discount for listeners only. I don't think you can get that same discount anywhere else. So hey, that's something that we want to do, is just to make sure to provide you guys with the best value possible. So without further ado, let's get to the show. And again, I just wanted to be transparent with you that this is a sponsored podcast, but I don't think that you'll find it much different than what you're used to. So thank you for being such great listeners. Hey everyone, and welcome to the masterclass series on Indie Game Movement, where we're going to be talking about overcoming the challenges of hooking your players. In this episode, we dive deep into the journey of understanding what it takes to hook players and keep them engaged. Our guest shares their experiences and lessons learned from navigating the challenges of capturing and sustaining player interest. From addressing common pitfalls to discovering what truly drives player engagement, we'll explore the key strategies that developers need to master in order to build games that resonate with their audience. Whether you're struggling to engage with players or looking to refine your approach, this episode offers valuable insights to help you take your game to the next level. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Patrick Rose. Patrick, how is it going? It's great to have you back on the show, man.
I'm also super happy to be back. I'm doing well, and I hope you do well too.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. And you know, folks, as I let in, this is a new and exciting, different kind of, podcast episodes that we're doing here with Patrick, all on the concept and idea of how to create irresistible games. And, as part of the masterclass that I mentioned, this mini series that we're doing. So as I already shared the information on what that entails, we're just going to dive right into the conversation. But first, Patrick, please, I know you were a guest on the show before, but introduce yourself and give us a little insight to your background and everything else.
Right. I'm working as a product analyst, product researcher, product success expert in the games industry, right? And I'm doing this for the past 5 years now, being a consultant, freelance, and I gained a lot of experience in companies like Bandai Namco before. I have been working on titles like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, or Tekken, Dragon Ball, you name it, all these big Bandai Namco brands. And before that, I spent a few years within very successful free-to-play game companies. They were making games for mobile, for PC, and for browser as well. And I have learned a lot being a games researcher, games analyst. And these days, I teach all these things to my clients and help them become much more successful with their games.
Awesome. Yeah. And wow, some, major brands and tons of work experience and stuff. So, it's really great to have you here because, there's so many things that I'm excited to dive deep in with you. And on top of that, too, I mean, you do also have some exciting news to share, which is also, part of the reason why we're here today, too, is you're
Mm.
you're you're launching a course, right?
Yes, I'm really excited about that one. In fact, I've been working on this course for the past month, almost this entire year, right? And the reason why I do this is because as a consultant, I can't like help a lot of people at the same time. I try to do that. I go to conferences, give lectures for free, do mentorships, all these kind of things. I really try to help as much as I can. And I also understand that indie studios, for example, they usually don't have the budget to hire consultants, right? But what I'm trying now is putting all that knowledge, or at least like the most important cornerstones of game success, all the knowledge I gained in all these years of games research and analysis and working with the big and successful titles, I try to put that all into a condensed course. And we got like 10 hours ready now for everyone to watch, and it's going to release soon. It's not released just yet, but it releases this November. And yeah, I'm like, this course is going to be about accessibility in games, how to make your game accessible to a big audience and get them hooked and then keep them in the game, focusing on retention and user engagement. All like the foundation of all this is user psychology. So it's all like psychology based. We work a lot with psychology in this course. And then big part of it will also be monetization. And you can use all these things for all business models. This is the best thing of it. It's not just for one particular type of game. It's not only for free-to-play mobile games or for premium games. It is the meta knowledge. It is a psychology. It's general monetization techniques that potentially work for all type of games. And that is the course going to be about. And I'm really excited about this because I put all like the recent years of research, I put it all in there and can't wait to hear the feedback of the audiences.
Yeah, no, and that's great to hear too, because so many times we hear all these either success stories or strategies and tactics that other people are doing, and they can be very anecdotal. So the point that and the approach that you're taking by being kind of broad, but also very hyper focused and on the areas that are really going to create that impact, and also being applicable. The psychology and understanding these things is very applicable to anybody's business, to anybody's game, and how they're creating it. So I love that approach, and yeah, definitely curious for more. But hey, folks, as I said earlier, I mean, this is why we're here today, and in particular for today's part of the masterclass under the overarching subject of how to create irresistible games. We're going to be talking today about overcoming the challenges of hooking your players, because this is something we all struggle, that we all face. So to kick off our session today, Patrick, I mean, as we know, lots of developers, studios, face this challenge of capturing players' attention. So reflecting on, let's say, your early career, what challenges did you see others face in trying to, hook their players? And how do those experiences kind of shape your approach today?
Oh yeah, so getting players hooked is really, really difficult, right? You have to deal with marketing campaigns. There's different ways to market your game. You have the traditional ones for premium games where you create big game trailers, where you tell people this great stuff is in your game, but then you also have to actually deliver on these things, which is then another challenge. You have business models like free to play these days, which often rather work with performance marketing, meaning you find ways to show people advertisements on maybe Instagram or TikTok these days quite a lot, and try to get them in for a cheap price, for a cheap cost per install, for example, and then you try to cover the cost with a high LTV. So there's a lot of technique going on if it comes to performance marketing nowadays. So a lot of different ways eventually. Influencer marketing is another way. With my course and with my content, I usually rather focus on the product itself. It's not necessarily marketing content I'm talking about. And what can we do about the product? And what I've seen in the past is that a lot of products don't really consider that. They don't understand that hooking people starts with the product itself. If you have the right things in place in your product, then you can hook people much easier also with your marketing efforts. And that is, for example, something I call viral game design. How does viral game design work? We often hear virality in terms of marketing, but how can you create a game design that hooks player due to interesting mechanics, interesting Easter eggs maybe, and so on. So this is a strategy you can go through that marketing, and this is what I saw quite a lot in games working, especially these days when it's a lot about TikTok and so on. But I also see that a lot of studios don't know how that works. How can you hook these players? And therefore, they often have these very high cost per installs. It's very expensive to get users in your game. And nowadays, it's becoming more and more important to find the ways that lower these cost per installs, right? And you do that, it starts with the product. It starts with the game design. This is really important. It's not just the marketing. Another really, really important thing, and I talk about that in my course a lot, is accessibility. You have to consider that your product needs to be accessible, meaning understandable with little effort for a big audience. That doesn't mean you need to make it casual or anything, or super easy to play. It just means that people get easily what's going on there, and that is the actual thing that will be fun for them. They have to be able to see that in the first trailers, and when they play it, even in the first minutes or seconds at best, it should be fun right away, which even a lot of premium games out there don't do quite right, especially with big onboarding processes where you have to go through tutorial text boxes and all that stuff. What happens in these cases, if it's not fun enough in the first minutes on Steam, well, people will just get a refund and your game sale is gone. Yeah. So this is the kind of things I've been experiencing and working on in the recent years.
Yeah. And, those two things you outlined are really great. And one, you're, calling out to accessibility. I mean, folks, that also, as far as how I interpret it, also relates to empathy, taking an empathetic approach. Because if you're not empathetic of the various different ways that people can access your game in whatever way, shape, or form that is, it creates friction. It doesn't get them hooked. And then the other one you called out to is just hook by design. I know we hear it all day in and day out, I'm sure, but it comes down to the product. And actually, Patrick, that's an area I want to dive into a little bit more, because it's like, we know we got to make a great game, is what they say. I like to say, make a game that surpasses existing value while catering to an audience, right? But still, something needs to be compelling and a great experience. But in light of that, you shared some interesting details about hook by design, or, you're really hooking your product. So of some of those things that we sometimes maybe get in the weeds with, like detail, mechanics and all these other aspects of game design. I mean, in your journey, what are some of the, let's say, the most significant hurdles that developers face in light of that when trying to design games that, truly hook players and even keep them coming back? Because I know this is probably the biggest challenge that they struggle with, and thinking they have that core mechanic or whatever else is, and then realizing, oh, it might not have hit the mark where they wanted it to.
Yeah, right. I think one of the biggest problems is the lack of strategy. They don't know where they want to go with their game design. They don't know why they want to add that great exploration feature, for example. I hear this so often, exploration. We want to have exploration in the game. And whenever a client says that, I will ask why. What kind of exploration do you want? What kind of motivation factor are you focusing on here? Because there's a lot of games with exploration out there. Let's say the original version of No Man's Sky, for example. It had like infinite exploration. You had like billions of planets to visit. You cannot, in a lifetime, you cannot visit all these planets, right? So much exploration. But is it fun? Not really, at least the original version. They changed the game a lot. It's a much better game now, but in the very beginning, people were bored because there was no real motivation factor driving this exploration. There was no reason. When I talk exploration, when I talk motivation factors, I'm talking about something like self-determination theory, competence factor, autonomy factor, relatedness factor, these kind of things. Maybe I talk about these things later. In my course, I talk about these things a lot and what these factors actually mean. But you need to understand the underlying psychology first. If you don't understand it, you will put features in your game that you have seen in other games, but you don't understand why they are fun in other games. And because maybe exploration may be fun in your favorite game, but maybe exploration isn't fun in that other game. And if you tell your team now you want to have that exploration feature, and your team doesn't understand what you actually mean by that, doesn't understand the psychology behind it, they won't find the right direction. And it might not be fun. It might not be engaging, so you keep people excited. So to answer your question, it is the lack of strategy often and the lack of understanding the whys. Why do we play games? Why do we like a specific feature? And in order to answer the whys, you need to understand human intrinsic motivation. You need to understand human psychology.
Yeah, like folks, this is so great because it gets to a much deeper level. I mean, you've heard me on the show before call out to how important it is to know your audience, right? And I think in a lot of ways within that context that I've shared that, and it really comes down to more of the surface level stuff like, oh, who is my audience? What are they made up with and stuff? But you know what? This takes it even a deep further, finding that intent, and like Patrick said, call out and pose those questions as to why. What is that intent? What are these motivations? And even getting it down to that psychological level. Because Patrick, I would say I agree. I think a lot of people at times they look at what the market's doing. They're like, okay, well, if we're making this kind of game, then we should be doing X, Y, and Z because that's the makeup of that game, and maybe combine another mechanic to make it unique. And therefore, now we stand out. We could tap into this market further. And let's face it, folks, there's nothing wrong with these strategies, but there's ways to go deeper. And when we're talking about strategy, a lot of times we think of strategy as a plan or execution. It's not the case. Strategy is really coming down to the intent, the vision, and also with that vision, aligning it with those motivations and really, really at a much deeper level, understanding those audiences. So this is so great stuff here. And I mean, I'm sure getting to this level too can kind of help people establish trust. And I mean, you've been in the industry for so many years and worked on various projects. I mean, could you share like a pivotal moment when you realize the importance of focusing on this level of engagement with players and how it, kind of influenced your approach to telling others how to structure or design their games?
Right. So, well, I believe a pivotal moment came actually already really early on in my games career when I started working for a free-to-play game company. They were making browser and mobile games, really, really successful titles, right? Like talking about $300,000 per day in revenue, successful, extremely successful. But the type of games there at that time, that was about 12 years ago, the free-to-play titles were mainly on browser, and they started to become more and more popular on mobile devices too, and more and bigger there. But I was a core gamer since I can think. Basically, I was playing all type of video games already up to that point, so I was also very happy to find my way into the video game industry. But I also had to admit at that time, well, it's only like browser free-to-play, mobile free-to-play games. It's not the most exciting ones. But what truly blew my mind is just that these games were so successful. These days, free-to-play games on mobile often make even many millions per day, right? Which is crazy. At that time, $300,000 per day was really, really high. Today, it's still very high. A lot of people, a lot of studios would be happy to have a successful title like that. But these days, some titles even make more than 7 million per day, which is crazy. But how is that possible? I am a person, at that time, I loved games like Silent Hill, the remake, Silent Hill 2, the remake just released. I love that game. And Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy, Mass Effect, these are the kind of games I love, right? These should be the successful ones. These are like the pieces of art, super engaging, awesome stuff. How can a browser game with like 2D graphics, kind of not exciting, no good storyline or anything like this. How can this make more money than a lot of my favorite games out there? I felt like these players of these games, they have no idea. That was my first thought. But the pivotal moment came when I really started to try to understand why this is happening. And it was my job at that time. And they hired me as a games researcher. So I had to dig deeply into how can a game of this kind be engaging or even more engaging than my favorite games. Because these games are not only played for like 10 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours. These games are played every day for like several months, sometimes even years by its players, even though they don't look as engaging as my favorite games, right? So what makes them engaging anyways? And that was a pivotal moment because this is where I dig deeper into psychology. I already had a little bit of a psychology background because I started over as a HR manager actually in my working career after college, but I didn't stay long in that job. But the psychology knowledge I got from there about intrinsic motivation and what engages employees to stay in a company, for example, like the loyalty of employees, that is really, really similar to the loyalty of gamers. And I approached this topic from this perspective. And this is where I understood how these mobile games or browser games or these free-to-play games are capable of creating so much engagement and make people pay eventually. And that was really like a shift in perspective. And I saw games from a very different level. I saw the meta of games and human psychology, and I started to understand what I sometimes like to call it the natural laws of video game success.
Yeah, no, I love that story too, and kind of that process of making those realizations. And I mean, to maybe go a little bit deeper. I mean, I want to kind of go over maybe some, I don't know, are there any like specific examples, that maybe relate to this or slightly different from your experience, where you turn, let's say, a struggling project into one that successfully hooked players? Because it sounds like, with this pivotal moment, you're better equipped now to maybe like handle some of those situations where it's like, hey, we're really having difficulty, and how do we turn this around, and how can those elements, like, what can our listeners maybe learn from these approaches that you learned in that situation?
There was one interesting thing. Well, it's not the same thing. It doesn't directly connect to the psychology I was just talking about, but it connects to the strategy thing I talked about before. Strategy is something really, really important. Strategy in terms of game design, strategy in terms of, well, product strategy, business model, deciding what business model makes most sense for your specific game design, for your team's skills, and so on. So one game where it made a lot of sense to think about the meta, the market meta, and the sales meta, and the psychology meta was, well, the Dark Pictures anthology. That one is by Supermassive. They are also known for Until Dawn specifically, and these days they are also working on Little Nightmares 3. And at that time I was working for Bandai Namco, and they pitched the Dark Pictures anthology to us, which is a series of games which are very similar to Until Dawn. And each of these games should be its own story, and it's basically its own episode, right? With its very own characters and so on. But it plays like a smaller version of Until Dawn, each of these episodes. So they pitched that game. At that time, I was a product and business analyst, and I was supposed to forecast the success potential of that game series. But I knew about the issue of the episodic format. We have learned from things like the Telltale game series, for example, the Telltale Walking Dead, for example. They had the problem of the attach rate. The first episode sells pretty well. They had a good brand and everything, and they had also really cool game design and cool story. People loved the Walking Dead series by Telltale. And then the problem is about only 40 to 60% of the people who have purchased the first episode will purchase the second episode. That is quite natural. Depending on how popular your game series is, this number might even be lower. And that will keep happening with each consecutive episode, right? So we had one advantage here now with Supermassive at that time, with the Dark Pictures anthology. That was that these episodes were already detached from each other. However, what I suggested at that time, let's not call them episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, because then people will be biased again, and they might start thinking they have to purchase the first episode, they have to play the first episode before they can play the second episode, and so on. So the idea then was just let's name them individually. Let's name the first one. What is it called again? Let's name the first one Man of Medan. Let's call the second one Little Hope, and so on. And don't tell people which one is actually the first one and the second one, so they can play in any order. That strategy, that focus on psychology and psychological biases helped us to, well, at least cushion the effect of this attach rate issue. And knowing about these type of strategies, knowing about psychology helps you to eventually have more sales with very simple methodologies. It's just a little shift in strategy. It's not even more effort or anything. It's just a bit smarter. And this is how it helps you look at the meta, look at the natural laws of the video game success.
And I know that specific example isn't necessarily going to pertain to everyone out there, but I think my main takeaway from that is just like you called out to, it can be so simple sometimes, and just how that approach can just be shifted a little bit differently, and then you know struggles can be overcome, challenges can be averted, and so many other things can come of these things just by taking that shift. But in that shift comes again the understanding of those motivations, the understanding of the psychology of things, and that's that deeper level is so important. And I think it's really cool because ultimately it helps us gain perspective, and if we gain more perspective, we're going to have more clarity. So I mean, as we kind of get ready to close here, as someone who's experienced essentially, as you outlined, kind of some of the highs and lows of trying to engage players, what's one piece of advice you'd offer, studios or developers or anyone listening today who are kind of struggling to hook their audience?
Right. I usually really start with the basics, with the foundation. When you want to build a building, what do? You go to a college, you go to university, you learn, about becoming an architect, actually. What will you learn then there? You learn the physics, you learn the necessary subjects about how to build a building that will stand. Because if you don't learn about these things, what will happen? You will try to build a building and it will most likely break. And that is really, really expensive and even dangerous if a building like this collapses, right? So we want to put a lot of effort into understanding the physics and everything that is necessary to build a solid building before we start doing that. Games are also really, really expensive. Even if you make your own indie game, it will take you weeks, months, years, most likely. That is expensive. And somehow you need to survive. And if you're not sure if this is going to fly or not before you even start, because you don't understand the physics, then this is an issue. So one of the very, very first things I do when I work with new clients, I teach this foundation. And this foundation, the interesting thing is you might think, well, okay, that is interesting for game design students, for newcomers and stuff. But the thing is, no, it's interesting for everyone. Even a lot of the AAA veterans have never really learned these things because the industry is born from like a crafting perspective, basically. Like the industry is really, we try to build games that didn't work, then we try to build the next games that didn't work, and then until something sticks. This is how the games industry works, in most places at least, and we have never really learned why things stick. It's not empiric enough just yet. It's not scientific enough just yet. And the reason for that is because it's still a very young industry, and we're just in the process of changing that. I also talk to a lot of universities, game design universities. They rarely teach deeply about psychology. And I'm about to change that. I'm really doing my best to change this and putting more science and psychology into the games industry.
And I love that too, because I think what you called out to is something we're all familiar with. I've heard in various contexts, various guests saying, it's all about iteration. And yes, in the process itself, it can be about iteration, of course. But I think to what you called out is more of a systemic, not necessarily problem, but a systemic viewpoint of it's always iterative. We're always iterating from someone else. I mean, how many times have we seen people making trailers that look like AAA trailers, even though no one recognizes the logo that they lead in with for a whole 5 seconds, right? It's because we're all following kind of this iterative process, to so to speak. But there is huge value in learning the fundamentals, as you call out. And I think maybe part of the problem is we don't realize that fundamentals doesn't mean they're basic or simple or for beginners, because some of these key concepts, and this is why I think that was such a great key takeaway. Some of these concepts are vital to how we can create these experiences. So when we're building that game or building that house, we don't have to go in with something that ends up becoming very expensive or, and fall apart. So I absolutely love that key takeaway for listeners to go with and maybe explore a little bit more. So, I mean, I know we're on time for today, but wow, this is such great in-depth conversations about, how to hook your players. And, I really appreciate you sharing your journey. And yeah, I mean, this is this is one of the key components. And we have others that we're addressing in future episodes that will do other deep dives, but hooking your players is definitely one of the key components that you address in your course, right? And could you give us a quick preview of anything else you'll cover, or maybe other than what you shared earlier? Or I know there's a lot, so even if you say it again, some of those things again, but they're all valuable points.
Right. So to me, I always focus on 4 success pillars. Number 1 is user acquisition. Number 2 is engagement. Number 3 is monetization. And number 4 is accessibility. If you nail all 4 of them, if you understand all 4 of them, you will be able to make a successful game no matter what business model you have, no matter if you have freemium or free to play. This is what the course is about, except for one thing, and that is user acquisition. That will only be a little part of that course, because user acquisition to biggest degree is marketing. I'm planning with some partners to have a marketing course in future as well to cover that pillar entirely too. But with this course, I want to focus mainly on the product and design side to create that successful product. And later we can put on top of that also the marketing side. So these 3 success pillars, the core of the course: engagement, monetization, and accessibility.
Yeah, but hey, like you said, though, it really does. And I think we all know this, folks, is it really does start with the product. Marketing is important. I'm obviously going to say that all day, but you can't have marketing without a product, and you can't have marketing without a really good, strong product. Because if you put them together, it could just be like building that house that's not, sound and structure. So absolutely love it. And, for those of who are interested in signing up for the course, there is a special offer available only for listeners. This is an exclusive offer. So, check out the link in the show notes and go to that page and, see if it's something that interests you. If you like anything that we're discussing today and think this could be beneficial, check it out. If not, and you want to hear more, then just wait for the other episodes where, Patrick and I will do more of these deep dives around those key pillars. And again, Patrick, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to the next episodes with you in this masterclass series.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. RenGen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.